Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. I'm your host, Stuart Newsom, and with me today are two esteemed experts who are part of the Infinix Healthcare family in our ERS division, which handles our end-to-end RCM services. I have Julie Graham, who's a senior coding manager at ERS, and Kristeen Coronado, the Chief Operating Officer. I'm always excited to have both of you as guests because you always bring a wealth of knowledge and information and experience to the table when we're discussing these critical issues. So, how are both of you doing today?
Very good.
Doing great. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So, if you'll recall, we did part one of what we have calling our RAC audit series. We're going to have a three-part series all about RAC audits. And RAC audits encompass a whole lot of information, a whole lot of detail. So when we were brainstorming about a session on RAC audits, we realized we need to break this up in additional parts. May expand into four parts. I don't know. We'll see after today. But that first part really focused on common mistakes that organizations make when they receive, say, an audit letter. The second part is going to focus on common mistakes that organizations make during the actual RAC audits itself and how to navigate through them effectively. So today, obviously, we're going to discuss the importance of ensuring that the right medical records are sent in the response to the audit request, and also how to align with payer expectations to avoid recoupments. And we always know those payer expectations can be very vague. So both Julie and Kristeen have a lot of hands-on experience in offering guidance to our clients who have been subjected to a RAC. They've helped many of them and held their hands, so to speak, through the whole experience. So this session is really all about empowering you with practical strategies to improve your audit responses and also your compliance processes. Because like I always say, it's one thing to get paid and get the money. It's another thing to keep the money. So we want to make sure that just because you got paid doesn't mean that you get to keep that money. So we want to make sure that your revenue integrity, this is one of those things that speaks to that revenue integrity. So as always, throughout the session, we invite you to send your questions in the Q&A. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll address them as adequately as we can. Believe me, if these two can't answer it, there's probably not an answer to the question at all. But if we don't have an answer, we'll find it for you. So just make the most of that opportunity to address those questions in the Q&A. So with that, ladies, we'll get started. So the first question I have is it's pretty all encompassing of the whole topic of this particular episode. What are the common mistakes made with RAC audits in general? I know we talked about that, the letters, the mistakes made when you get the actual letter, but let's talk about the RAC audits itself.
Yeah, so we've identified the top 5 to 6 common mistakes that we see and have seen with RAC audit requests, letters, or just with the process in general. And the first thing is no response to the letter, or the letter might not be taken seriously. So it's very important that when you get that letter that you take it seriously and that you respond to the letter. You don't want to just avoid it or ignore it. That would lead to automatic recoupment. And so in that, you also need to know how long you have to respond. Each letter will identify how long you have to respond, how long they're giving you to provide them that information. And so, for example, Performant gives you 30 days to respond. EXL gives you 45 days to respond. But you can also request an extension. Now you need to do that, let them know why you need the extension, and then that extension will be based upon however long they give you after the fact. So that's something to really be aware of, is responding to that letter in a timely manner and taking it seriously.
And I'll add to that, a lot of these letters can come directly to the practice, and some will come to the correspondence address that's on file, and some may come to your lockbox. And so, depending on who's reading the mail can actually determine the issues here, whether you have 30 days or 45 days, or if you find the letter in somebody's inbox that might not have opened it promptly, that can be one of the reasons that you request an extension. And you can say you just found the letter, which is true a lot of the times. That's what happens.
Yeah, awesome. So if you can avoid those mistakes, and obviously you're getting off on the right foot, doesn't mean it's going to go easy.
Absolutely.
So, and one of the things I know that comes to mind is, the RAC audits, they send a letter. I think they're making assumptions, that the practice is going to make these mistakes. And maybe the practice is not being taken very seriously. So what steps can organizations take to ensure they are taken seriously during a RAC audit? Standing up and saying, yes, we mean business. You have our attention. And we also have everything lockstep in how we're supposed to approach this.
Kristeen, do you want to tackle that one?
That's a tough one, but I will say this, that I think that when a practice receives the letter, it needs to get into the right hands immediately so that we can determine, or you can determine, what exactly they're asking for. It could be records. It could just be a summary of the treatment, but I think it's really, really important to determine what it is that they're asking for. And what we see with all of these different contractors is it could be something different per contract. It could be a diagnostic test. It could be an X-ray. It could be even an opno. And I think it's really important to understand what it is that they're asking for.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Does that help clarify?
Sure does.
Yeah. And that actually leads into my next mistake of not reading the letters carefully to find the specific information or relevant records that are needed. And a point that you made, Kristeen, that I'd also like to piggyback off of, it was such a great point, is sometimes the letters get assigned to individuals who are not able or not in a position to answer those letters. Like it might get sent to the medical records department instead of to somebody who's a coder or an auditor who knows how to work these properly. So when you receive a letter, you need to read the entire letter. Some letters might have multiple pages, 5 pages or more. And most of the most important information is often towards the end of the letter. And so that rule that you need to follow is to read the request carefully, sometimes twice, just to get a clear understanding of what that audit is asking you for. And so, for example, we had a client that the audit letter was sent and addressed to the medical records department, but the practice administrator saw that, intercepted it, and was able to get that over to us so that we could actually work that audit. And it wasn't in the hands of the wrong, and people that really aren't fit to deal with that. And so you also have to look to see what exactly they're asking you to look for. So they may say they want to review payment accuracy, which means coding. And so you may see that they want all of these medical records. They're requesting 9 different things. They want the H&P, the progress notes, the radiology reports, the lab records, the op note. They want a multitude of things. But if you understand how, what exactly they want, you can make sure that you send the exact information that they're looking for. So for example, we had a case where they'd sent this, they were asking for a multitude of reports, but they were really looking for coding accuracy. And so we also had an authorization for this surgery. This surgery had to be reviewed with all the medical records, pertinent medical records sent before we could even obtain authorization. And so, and knowing that and doing our research, we knew that okay, we've already sent all the H&P, the labs, everything else you need. So now you're looking for the surgery note, right? Because we did it prior to the surgery. So now they want to see that surgery note to substantiate and to, make sure medical necessity has been supported.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think also from my perspective, in these circumstances, I've always seen how you respond is very important.
Yes.
In a very, professional manner, making sure that you're clear and articulate in your response, only sending what's requested, only responding to what is requested. You don't want to request
Yeah.
any more. Certainly don't want to respond with anything any less, because sometimes
And
you can overdo it.
yeah,
And
and you don't want to send something that has no bearing on what they're asking for, that doesn't
right,
support their request to begin
right.
with. That's
You're not
important
just
too.
sending information just for the sake of sending information.
Yes, right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that really supports who receives the letter and who understands what is being requested.
Mhm. Right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, in RCM, you both of you live it, and I've
Mhm.
I've had a lot of experience in it as well. It tends to be in silos, and so if it goes
yeah,
Yes.
to someone in that silo, and that includes leadership, sometimes leadership can be in the silo, and so they get this letter and they don't understand why they're getting this letter. Maybe they put it aside or they assign it to someone else. That person, it's the communication has to be clear internally in order to communicate externally and put the best foot forward. Would a step be when does maybe legal representation come involved? I know that typically doesn't escalate until it gets to maybe some criminal or civil
right.
penalties that may involve. We're talking recoupments here. But then we can go into the threshold, which could probably be a part four, right? Or maybe part three. What happens if this escalates into a pattern of fraud and abuse, which
Right,
many times it can lead to that. Here we're just talking about recoupments.
right. Yeah,
So you really don't need any legal action. I think that's something I see from people too is, well, I'm going to go out and get an attorney, and they may not get a healthcare attorney because there is a difference.
yeah,
Mhm.
And but you may not need an attorney in this situation, correct?
right.
I would
Yeah,
say most of the time you should not need an attorney.
yeah,
Your documentation should stand on its own.
Hmm.
And a really good coder understands the letter and the request and understands who the audience is and what the audit's about.
right.
Right.
And something that we were kind of just talking about piggybacks into another one of our mistakes, and that's not submitting the correct documentation. So kind of what I
Mhm.
was saying earlier about sending things that have no relevance to what they're asking for, sending other procedures or other diagnostic tests that aren't supportive of what they're asking for. But then to the other side of that coin, if you find that maybe some of your documentation is lacking or isn't where it could be, you could also have the doctors support that with a letter of medical necessity. Those are
Yep.
acceptable. You could say, have the doctor write that and explain why it is supported, the medical necessity of what he performed is supported. And then if you have any documentation that is missing, you could also look for additional documentation. We had a case of this with some carotid studies that we performed, or that the doctor performed. And we had to go back and look at some of the previous progress notes, previous follow-up office visits to help support the diagnosis, the ICD-10 in support of the
Mhm.
93880. So those are two really great things to keep in mind with your documentation.
No,
Absolutely.
exactly.
Um, and then another one of those mistakes is no follow-up with the requester. So again, kind of ignoring it or not taking it seriously, or to Kristeen's point, maybe it doesn't get seen right away. But initially you have about, you should follow up 1 week, after you've sent the information that's been requested, you should follow up a week later to confirm receipt of those records and to confirm receipt that they received the information. Um, This can be done, we do it verbally, but it can be done by fax or by email. But you want to make sure you make that contact with the requester to ensure that they've acknowledged they have your information and it's being reviewed. Then after that, you can follow up every 30 days. And I know that some of the that they hired for the TPAs to review these third-party administrators, you can actually look up the records to see what's been reviewed, where they're at, if they have that online capability. That's not for all of them, but that is a possibility with some of them. So
Yeah, I think Performant actually has that online access that you can actually determine that they've received everything and where they are in the process.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's just
Um,
important as well, right? I mean, because you want to make sure, I mean, you're doing your part. You can,
Right.
you know, everything that we're talking about today, you know, every organization out there can take it to heart and say, okay, I'm going to do it exactly the way, you know, Infinix told me to do it, and has instructed me to do it. But then you also have to make sure that the TPAs are going to do their part. You know,
Right.
they're
Right.
contractors too. I mean, they're there on behalf for CMS or even maybe even some payers. We're making assumptions that, well, they're the ones that sent the letter. Surely they're going to do their job, and many times they're not. So it's good to, you know, you definitely have to check up on them. The online is awesome, but you can't assume everyone's going to be online, as Julie pointed out. So what do you do? I mean, I know you said, you know, contact them and check up on them, but I mean, who do you call? Because we all know when you get a payer on the phone, how that can go, right? So what are some of those methods of checking up on it other than online, if they don't have an online service for that?
So Stuart, I'll answer this. I think typically the letter that you receive is going to have a way to contact them.
Good.
And that's the method that you contact them. And it might be registering yourself with their online portal. It may just be email, and it could be fax, and it could be just by telephone. I think there are several contractors where you're going to have Connolly and Associates, Performant, a few other places, and they're going to tell you how to contact them. And it's
Yeah.
really, really important, even if you're late, to contact that number or that
Yes.
method that's in the letter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the last mistake that we'll kind of touch on today is denial is received, but you're not working the denial and you just allow the recoupment without evaluation of that denial.
Yeah.
So it's important to exhaust all of your opportunities. That means to, you know, make that initial contact, send the information that they're looking for, make sure all records or whatever they're looking for is sent to them. And then you also often have the opportunity for redetermination. If they, you know, come back and deny still or uphold the denial, you can still do a redetermination, send additional information, maybe get the physician involved, all the way up to a Q2. A Q2 is your next level. And so you want to ensure you exhaust all three of those opportunities before you allow that recoupment. You certainly don't want to ignore it and allow that recoupment to just happen.
And I'll say this, even if the recoupment happens, you still might have an opportunity to go back to the MAC and do a redetermination. If you feel like the documentation supports medical necessity, you can go back to your MAC and do a redetermination. And after the redetermination, you can do that Q2 appeal. And we've been successful on both avenues. Very successful. It's just so very important not to let anything go by the wayside here.
Right.
Right. Because you're setting
Even
precedent. Yeah.
if the recoupment happens, you still, it's all is not lost.
Right. Right.
That's a great point.
Because either way, you're setting precedent, right? I
That's
mean,
right.
because if you do nothing and let the recoupment happen, now they know, wow, we're just going to look at when they do this again. It's going
Yeah.
to be another recoupment, another recoupment.
We
Because,
find
yeah.
this with a lot of practices. They don't understand why they're getting recouped, but it happens over and over again. And they're down a path where they have really no clue that they're down. They just know
Mhm.
they're getting recouped. And so we see this quite often. And
Right, right.
it's usually, the billing department might not have access to all the records or all the correspondence. That's what we see.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And it kind of goes back to, well, most RCM processes are designed to get the claim paid. And once
Yes.
it's paid, it's done, right? You've
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
your, you've got your net revenue, you're ready to roll, you made your adjustments, move on to the next. And then all of a sudden you have this recoupment letter, you got to dig all that out.
Right.
Where's the documentation that supports this? But it's very important to fight it
Right.
because then they're taking you seriously. That,
Yeah,
okay, well, they
absolutely.
have their act together. Because if you don't have your act together, now you're just easy prey. They're going to
That's right.
automatically just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. So I guess another question I have is, you know, I know Infinix helps people through the RAC process.
Hmm.
As we said in the beginning, both of you have had extensive experience in holding our clients' hands when they are going through a RAC. But then lessons learned from that. What are the corrective actions that you have that prevent it from happening again? Because you mentioned how it just happens over and over and they have no clue. I'm sure there's a whole lot, and that's a mouthful. I know I'm what I'm ask. I know what I'm asking, but how can we articulate all the steps needed to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, let me answer that. And I'll say this, that we're so fortunate to work with so many great practices that really do have great documentation and understand the local coverage determinations and the clinical policy bulletins, and they're on board with that and in step with that. And really what it is ensuring that our practitioners understand what the carriers are requesting, right? And
Hmm.
they're compliant with that request. It's so important for that to happen. And then it's making sure that all of your information is updated with the carriers. And I would say your telephone numbers, your correspondence addresses, your lockbox address, all of these things can actually go in the wrong direction because they're sending information to an incorrect or old or outdated person
Hmm.
Yeah,
or place. And it's so important that your information is up to date.
That's
I hope
awesome.
that answered the question.
Oh, it did. It did
Okay.
absolutely. And I know, I'm always someone who's I talk about denial prevention, where you also
Yeah,
can do maybe some audit defense because may not necessarily prevent an audit, but when that audit happens and they're asking for these recoupments, then you know exactly what to do, maybe because you've been there before, but it's education all the way down to the physician, documentation, education, that I know Infinix that both of you
mhm,
offer, coding instruction, coding services, just ways of improving their processes so when they are audited, because I've always heard it's not a matter of if, but when.
right.
So when you are audited, you're prepared and you're not just standing around thinking, what do I do? Well, yeah, first thing you do, call Infinix. Second
mhm.
thing is if you've had Infinix helping you all along, then you know the documentation is going to be in place. You know it's
Absolutely.
going to be tagged according and it's going to be coded correctly. So you're going to have a defensible argument to negate this recoupment, and then um, you know retain that revenue.
Perfect.
Awesome. So with that, I think we're going to wrap things up, but we do want to get to the Q&A with our audience. So we do have a couple of questions. So we'll see. We'll see how these go. So the first question is, what common mistakes lead to the submission of incorrect documentation? think we may have
That,
touched a little bit in our
yeah.
discussion.
But basically that would be not, not understanding what the letter is asking for.
Yeah.
And sending the incorrect documentation and that doesn't support the letter, interpreting that letter wrong. And then sending things that are, like you said earlier too, that are, too much, either too much or not enough, but then sending the wrong things that aren't really in support of what they're asking for.
Mhm, mhm. Gotcha. Okay, and this second one, how can organizations better assess denial letters before allowing recoupment? And it may be go back and listen to part one is what I would answer, right? Because
Well,
the answers are probably there, but yeah,
I think getting the letter to the appropriate person,
Mhm,
because, when correspondence comes in, it's a possibility that a medical records person receives this information and they have no idea what the actual pertinence is of the letter. I mean,
mhm,
if you receive anything from CMS or Connolly and Associates or Performant, and there's several others. And oftentimes that's not shared with the clerk that's opening the mail. And I think it's so important for higher level people to be reviewing the mail. So important.
Yeah, and that could also answer the question I gave a response to too, that making sure the proper person is, that letter falls into the right hands from the start.
Yeah,
mhm.
agreed.
Right, exactly. Well, very good. That's all the questions that we have. I'd like to thank both of you, Julie and Christine, for sharing, all of your advice, all your experiences, from a practical standpoint, and also for everyone for joining us today in this session. So we hope that you found all of these insights very helpful for navigating RAC audits with a lot of confidence, because it's all about confidence. And remember, understanding the audit process and avoiding common mistakes can make a significant difference in your outcomes. It's all about being prepared. So feel free to reach out with any follow-up questions or feedback. We appreciate everyone's participation and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Office Hours. So again, thank you, Julie and Christine. It's been great having you with us
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you.